I think the smartest people are smart because they know just how dumb they are. Intelligence is defined as the ability to acquire and apply knowledge and skill. Retaining and regurgitating information takes a lot of mental bandwidth and energy. We then amalgamate all that hard-earned information into a characteristic of who we think we are. For example, we invest a shit ton of time, energy, money, and effort to learn shit. And then we identify with what we now know and thus consider ourselves a learned and intelligent motherfucker. There's nothing wrong with learning and knowledge whatsoever. It's just that the mental bandwidth required to maintain and build upon knowledge and the attachment to the idea of oneself being a knowledgeable fucker or any kind of fucker can be in itself an obscuration of a more expanded view of the truth of what the fuck is actually up with this reality business. If you fill a cup full with water, then there will be no room in which to add any other kind of liquid. I mean, duh, right? If you keep the glass empty, then there's plenty of room for whatever appropriate beverage comes along at any given time. This can be achieved by always considering yourself as a beginner, because a beginner absorbs, whereas an expert who is overly identified with being an expert is mostly about showing off their expertise rather than expanding. Don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing knowledge or learning whatsoever. I'm all for it. But reality in its totality cannot be in entirety held in anyone's skull cup of any size. And that's just the aspects of the observable phenomenon of the cosmos provable through repeatable experimentation. A really smart person is smart because they know they're dumb. And they know that because through their capability of intelligence and their aspiration and drive to know, coupled with a willingness to get over their fucking self just enough to reach the outskirts of what can be known, they have seen and accepted the event horizon between what can and cannot be known. Thy thought cup has runneth the fuck over. I mean, here you are, an electric meat bubble, a golem made of stardust, and are somehow conscious. Conscious of this video, conscious of my glorious mustache, conscious of your body when it sends signal to your wrinkly pink meat computer, that is. And if you relax a bit and open up, you can become conscious of fundamental things that are normally ignored, like you can become conscious of life itself, coursing through the meat and bone of the body. You can become conscious of gravity's hug, of merging molecules through inhaled atmosphere, of emptiness by way of simple motion through emptiness. But there's one thing, the most fundamental thing to our experience that we rarely are conscious of, and that is consciousness itself. And as intelligent a species as we are, we still don't know what the fuck consciousness even is. A mouth cannot eat its own damn self. A sex organ cannot fuck itself. An eye cannot see itself, and yet we know it's there because we can see. Consciousness is like that. We don't see it because it is the thing that allows us to see. We can't know it because it transcends knowledge, and it/we are in fact that perpetual knower of temporary states of knowledge. You can be conscious of thought, which is a clear indication that you are not your fucking thoughts. To become aware of thought means there must be something observed, thought, and an observer. We're going to call it consciousness because we have to call it something. That's why motherfuckers have been meditating since times of antiquity. And what they all figured out by doing so is that as incredible and as vast as the thought plane is, in comparison to the actual wakeful emptiness which supports reality and existence itself, it's pretty fucking dumb. If you identify with being intelligent, then all your time and energy will be spent maintaining and proving and defending to yourself and others that you are so. That doesn't mean don't learn shit. This is entirely about identification and knowing yourself as the knower. This binding process through identification with knowledge and thought is true for any self-regard. Whether it's providing buoyancy to the ego or is self-deprecating, it's all ego food. Your consciousness, which is the baseline, the substratum of your experience of existence, is inexorably bound and identified with those temporary electrical events called thoughts. And the product is the entire cosmos being reduced to peeping through the tiny aperture of the human mind. I'm talking about you, by the way. Intelligence has built the societal infrastructure of this world that we all know and enjoy or hate, but regardless of your regard and not invalidating or discounting the importance of intelligence, it is not the end-all be-all of evolution. I mean, even wild animals know enough not to shit in their own bed. Hello? What seems clear is that the universe expands and unfolds and evolves. From the first simple microbes that wriggled out of the primordial muck to motherfuckers watching other motherfuckers vast distances away on glass screens like you're doing right now. This maxim of expansion and evolution seems self-evident. The outer universe itself is expanding at great and terrible speeds. I mean, you, right now, are hurtling through space at 1.3 million miles an hour, which is how fast the Milky Way is speeding through the cold and empty ink of eternal night. Intelligence. It's where we're at in our particular iteration of the unfolding of reality right here on our salty mud ball in the outer ghetto of the Milky Way, in this particular fold of the multiverse. But where will we go, and what will it take to move past the attachment to intelligence itself, and really the attachment to finding something to be attached to, and the need for us to maintain a desperate and ignorant sense of separateness from the universe? That's the job of the ego, by the way. It's not a villain. It's a construct which seeks to prove to itself that it exists separate from other supposed objects in this persistent illusion we call reality. And as it verifies separateness through the labeling process of attraction and aversion, it grabs consciousness, and together they become a me that defines itself as a motherfucker who likes this and that and hates that and this and is, indifferent to all that other shit. And to be clear, this isn't really about intelligence alone. It's about the delicate instrument that we are. And it's about the songs we sing to ourselves. I'm not dissing intelligence or intelligent folks whatsoever. If you got triggered a little bit, then you're welcome. Because what that means is that one of the strings of identification between your consciousness and who you think you are just got plucked. And that discordant sound within the melody of ego is the vibration of your own bondage to the limits of our capabilities to know. The greatest scientific minds actually grasp how little we know because they've rubbed up against the border of what can be known. But there are others who aren't satisfied to just rim reality. They plunge all into the dark void. They don't just keep their cups empty, their cups get fucking broken. I'm talking about the temporary destruction of paradigms and of egoic scaffolding. Some people call it ego death, but without an ego, there's no existence. What it really is an elimination of identification between what we're calling consciousness and thought forms. That's it. That's the big hubbub. That's the thing every seeker is seeking without initially grasping that seeking itself is the stick which separates the hungry mouth of the mind from the carrot of ultimate reality. That's the big mystical secret that's not a fucking secret, which is the original reason why folks started to meditate and initially built entire religions and spiritual systems and invented and created tulpa gods and sorted out practices around this simple transcendent self, knowing itself. Constructs, most of which have become the antithesis of this transcendent yet also mundane state. It's like, what the fuck? Intelligent people become smart by knowing they're dumb, which is just a dumb way of saying they somewhat grasp the enormity of it all, and despite the terror of it, they don't try to cover it up with thoughts or definitions as a salve or a buffer between egoic existence and what presents as a terrible and frightening void. And those dumb smart people become wise when they go beyond the needs of the ego to exist and transcend the event horizon of knowledge itself, and have a direct experience of the substratum of existence, which by nature of its ineffable transcendent enormity dissolves the tether of identification between consciousness, or what I like to call awareness without the of, and thought. And initially, it's a big fucking deal, like when the raindrop enters the ocean. It loses itself in enormity, and the backflow of that experience courses through the body in what can only be called bliss, like some kind of mystic, euphoric quantum orgasm. But when that drop comes back out, it realizes it's always been water and its nature is just to be wet. And it's like, duh, I've always fucking known without knowing I know. In a similar way, the proof that a primordial, lucid, cognizant ocean of awareness is in fact the permeating undercurrent of reality is that you are aware of reality. The drop that enters the ocean will eventually come back out, left only with one thing that's true. And this fundamental experience that it can't unknow, this perpetually experienced state, can never be properly explained in words, but the drop does its fucking best. And if it's not careful, it'll obscure this experiential awareness once again by the thought plane's need to encapsulate it within a narrative. And the ego, like the lizard's tail, always goes back. People who say they have no ego are full of shit, because without some ego, you are a non-functional vegetable to the rest of the world of phenomena. We can only get so far thinking and knowing. Just like a mouth can't eat itself, an ego can't unexist itself. No action will cause this direct experience of primordial reality, and yet action is required. Past the event horizon of the known, shit gets weird, and opposing statements are the only way to describe it, inadequate though they may be. So we make up words like grace, awakening, illumination, enlightenment, but all those words only serve to obscure. If you want to be an intelligent person, then by all means, please do. This world as it is could use some more fucking intelligence, you know what I'm saying? But perhaps if one feels compelled to jump back aboard the evolution train, it's going to take some very different twists and turns. It requires a willingness to go against the grain of everything you are, because you see, it's not a thing you do or acquire or learn. It's a release, a letting go, a process of unlearning, a dissolving, which triggers an unexplainable merging event, which, and depending on how many times the drop of ego you call me dips into the ocean and you lose yourself, it eventually simply reveals what the fuck you actually are and have always been since before time was even a thing. The truth is ever present in you as you right fucking now. Just stop looking and instead get used to it, because it's never not been there. Alrighty, well, have a nice day or existential crisis, whatever you need to do. Toodaloo.